Welcome back to Healthwise. I'm your host, Reggie Tatum. With us today is Dr. John Kempf. We were talking before the break on hormone replacement. That's a touchy subject sometimes for ladies. And, you know, Doc, tell us a little bit about it, because I know I've had some experiences when I was real young with people that needed hormones, and it was like, man, it was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
So.
It really is. Sometimes menopause, which is not an event but more of a transition, and sometimes menopause is just a really rough experience. And each woman has her own experience with it. Some it's not so bad, others it's really rough. For these women who are experiencing symptoms, what's happening is that their body recognizes that something that's been there for the last 40 years is no longer present, and its effects are widespread. It affects your bone, it affects your heart, it affects your sleep patterns. It just really can create havoc in some people's lives. And unfortunately, there isn't a good deal of really accurate information available for women to make a choice. You know, when you're trying to decide about something, you get as much information as you can, and hopefully the information is accurate and it'll help you to make a decent decision. But the amount of information about hormones is limited. The medical studies that have been done have mostly been failures. They haven't been well designed and they haven't been well executed. But the problem really is that hormones are just difficult to study. You know, when you're trying to study blood pressure medicines, for example, and you want to compare two different blood pressure medicines, you can not tell anybody who's getting what. You know, the doctors don't know and the patients don't know. All they know is they're getting a blood pressure medicine and they're going to see at the end of 5 years if this one's better than that one. You can do that with blood pressure medicine because the patients aren't going to be able to tell the difference between one and the other. But if you try to do a hormone replacement study comparing hormones to sugar pills, the women can tell the difference. I mean, the reason you take the hormones is that they have a noticeable effect.
Right.
Okay? So if you don't get the effect, you can usually figure out you must be getting the sugar pill, and if you're feeling better, you know you got the hormone.
Right.
But then it's not a blinded study anymore, and therefore, you know, human bias starts to come in and make its appearance, and that can alter your results. So when they tried to do it with younger women, obviously the dropout rate was pretty high because the women just wouldn't stay in the study. So they had a brilliant idea. They did a study called the Women's Health Initiative. Unfortunately, the authors of this paper had a conclusion before they did the paper. You know, their conclusion preceded their research, which really isn't how science is supposed to work.
Right.
But that's how they did it. And they also clearly had a pretty strong bias against hormones. So in the interpretation of their data, they often would skew the results a little bit to support their point of view. And in fact, they even stopped the study in the 6th year, throwing their hands in the air and crying that they couldn't continue this study in good conscience because women were dying. It got so bad that the New England Journal of Medicine actually published an editorial a couple of years ago saying that they disagreed with the findings or with the conclusions of the study, because the authors of the Women's Health Initiative had initially said that taking hormones increased a woman's risk of having a heart attack, when in fact, when you looked at the numbers, it decreased it. Because taking a statin, or having estrogen is like taking a statin, the cholesterol medicine, which explains something that people noticed but didn't really think too much about. Not many 42-year-old women keel over from heart attacks.
Right.
42-year-old men?
A lot. Right.
Yeah. So what's different? Well, among other things, estrogen. Right. Because women start to catch up in terms of heart attacks by the time they get to their 60s, which is when they haven't had estrogen for about the last 10 years, and they've lost that protective effect, start getting some plaque buildup in their coronary arteries, and they start having heart attacks. So not only does estrogen not cause heart attacks, it actually helps to prevent them. Then there was breast cancer. This was the topic where the authors of the paper, the Women's Health Initiative, really kind of went nuts. There was a change in the pattern of appearance of breast cancer, and it was with one particular substance, a drug called Prempro, which was Premarin and Provera. Now, women who still have a uterus will have to take both hormones, estrogen and progestin. Women who've had a hysterectomy only need to take the estrogen. This particular progestation's had some issues about it over the years, and we've used it off and on again now for birth control, which isn't one of my favorite uses, but that's the 3-month shot that kids will take.
Right.
But the only difference in the group where they saw a change in the pattern of appearance of breast cancer was women who took Provera. In the women who took estrogen alone, there wasn't any change during the course of the study. Now, they broke the study about 4 or 5 years ago, and about 3 weeks ago, there was an article published about follow-up on women who took estrogen alone. Mm-hmm. And surprisingly, they found about 25% fewer cases of breast cancer than expected. So not only does estrogen appear not to cause breast cancer, it also appears to have perhaps a slight protective effect. Now, numbers are small, and it's one of the problems with the Women's Health Initiative was such a tightly focused study. In order to do a double-blind study, the patients involved in the study could not be able to tell the difference between estrogen and sugar pills. So the population of women that they chose was women who were well beyond menopause, had no symptoms anymore, so if they wouldn't feel any better taking hormones. So the median age of the women in that study was 63, and yet the population they're trying to learn about is women in their late 40s and early 50s. So, I mean, it's bad science. You know, if you do a tightly focused group, you can draw conclusions about that group. And, you know, what I would say about a Women's Health Initiative is it showed that you probably shouldn't put people on medicine they don't need.
Right.
Well, okay, thanks. I wasn't doing that anyway, but good idea. Mm-hmm. But as far as whether it was safe for perimenopausal women in that group where they're starting into that process, is it safe for them? It didn't say anything because they didn't have any women in the study that looked like that.
Right.
You know, and if you don't study them, you can't draw conclusions about them. It was a dreadful paper. Unfortunately, it was bad news, and that's good press. So there it goes. You know,
I understand.
You know,
well, like I said, we got about a minute left, or
okay.
half a minute left. But so basically, the basic thing is,
if hormones make you feel better, take them. Take them. If they improve the quality of your life, they're definitely worth it. If there's any risk, it's so small that it's more than offset by what it does for you. If you don't know the difference, you don't need it, don't take it.
Don't take it.
Yeah, it's that simple.
Oh, well,
it's that simple.
And that's something, and it's nothing, no fear. No fear. That's the best
well,
thing.
I wouldn't. I think it's interesting, 75% of menopausal gynecologists take hormones. And they're the people who know the most.
That's it. So, okay. Well, Doc, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Feel free to come by any other time you want, and we'll be glad to have you. And audience, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Healthwise.
Healthwise is brought to you in part by Opelousas General Health System.